and I was teaching middle school history in Montgomery County. Then I moved back to Frederick, and that's how I ended up at the Literacy Council. I also have a background working in nonprofit, so it was able to kind of merge my two passions together of nonprofit work with the community that I obviously love from growing up here, and something to do with literacy and education. So it's a little bit about me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Karen, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Karen Post. I'm with the Literacy Council in Washington County. I have been a tutor for, I think, a little more than 10 years and have been more recently on the board of the Literacy Council and then doing this tutor training. So I'm really glad to be here also and to see so many people from the from both communities getting the training. So thanks for checking in with us.
Okay, so we're going to start off this evening.
Okay, before we start, before you share your screen, can I share something?
Yeah.
Okay, we talked about lesson plans, and one of the things we talked about was warm up. Now, we are all language lovers, so I thought it would be a good idea to actually have a warm up. And so here we go. It's just going to take a minute. This is just to get us in the mood.
Okay. I love puns. I drove my students crazy with them.
Okay. I hope that we can enjoy this session. It's a lot of work, but there's so much richness in the content we're presenting tonight. So remember that the chat room is great for questions too. Okay, thanks, Carolyn.
Okay. All righty. All right, so Lynn and I are going to talk about vocabulary. And share sound. Okay.
Okay. Vocabulary. Vocabulary is a collection of words that we know the meaning of when we hear, say, read, or write them. The words that we use to both receive information and to express ourselves. Vocabulary instruction for beginning ESL students starts with listening and speaking using oral vocabulary. Later on, of course, reading and writing using print vocabulary is developed. These are the things that we'll cover in our discussion on vocabulary. We'll walk through actual vocabulary lessons from both Ventures and Challengers using the teacher manuals and the student books.
As we noted when we discussed lesson plans last night, the teacher's manual is organized around a warm-up, the presentation, practice, and the comprehension check. The lessons we're going to, the pages of lessons that we're going to show tonight come directly from the Ventures Teachers Edition. Every unit begins with a picture and a vocabulary list. This list makes it easier to find out what your student knows by establishing a baseline of words. Take a close look at this Ventures page. Both the picture and the text above it, read what it says up here, because when we do the video, you won't be able to really see what we're pointing at, but you'll be able to look at this. And you know, just sort of peruse that picture for a minute. A couple weeks ago, Lynn and I took it upon ourselves to make a little video that we're going to show you demonstrating how to teach this part of this lesson. So here we go. We'll see how it is. Oops. Teach vocabulary using Ventures. Step one is the warm-up. Begin by finding out what your student already knows. Lynn, What do you see in this picture?
Girl, table, chair, man, red, green.
Good, very good. Now we'll do the presentation or instructional part of the lesson. Country, country, country. Repeat.
Country, country,
Good. Country, country, country.
country,
Good. ID card, ID card, ID card.
ID card, ID card, ID card.
Good. Okay, next we'll do practice. And Lynn was very good. She already pointed to the pictures, so the practice should go very well. The practice involves listening, repeating, and pointing. Country, country, repeat.
Country, country,
Good. ID card, ID card, ID card.
ID card, ID card.
Good. Next is the comprehension check. And if your student is a real beginner, you may need to teach yes and no. So I would do that this way. Yes, yes. Repeat.
Yes, yes.
No, no. Repeat.
No, no.
Good. Is this an ID card?
Yes,
Is this a country?
yes.
Is this a phone number?
No.
Good. Next, we can do an expansion activity, if your student has enough English to do it. And we'll start with, I love Mexico. Repeat.
I love Mexico.
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 United States.
United States.
I'm from the United States. Where are you from? What country are you from?
I am from Mexico.
Point to Mexico.
I am from Mexico.
Very good. We're going to demonstrate. Okay, so let's review the steps you saw in the video. The first step was the lesson warm-up, and that can include a preview a review of the previous lesson. In this case, we were finding out what the student already knew by asking, what do you see? Make a mental note or a written note of the words the student says and then review them. I could have written them down and then done a little reading exercise with her pointing to the words that she gave me and having her read them. Pay particular attention to sounds or words that your student has trouble with also. The second step is the presentation. Always model the behavior you want to see from your students so that they can literally see and hear what you expect in the way of a response. Use the gestures we showed you in the conversation topic. And at this level, you can't rely solely on language to tell students what you want them to know. You can gesture less as your student understands the process. I wasn't real consistent in that video with the gestures. It's sort of what you would do, start out with it, and if your student is responding easily, then you wouldn't have to keep doing them all the time, which is what I did with Lynn. Use your pointer or finger if meeting in person to point to the words and pictures as you present them. Ask the student to listen, use the listening gesture, and then to repeat, using the beckoning gesture as you point to the vocabulary words and the pictures. So the third step is to practice, and you give the students an opportunity to practice what they've learned. The student listens as you say and point to the words again, then repeats the words. Then the student listens to the words and points to the corresponding picture in their book. You point and repeat as needed, but not too much. If it's too difficult for the student, then skip it and for the moment and come back to it throughout the lesson in little pieces. The practice step looks very similar to the presentation as you saw in this video. Lynn was already pointing to the pictures in the second step. So it really made the second and third step almost identical in the video. And that may happen with the student. So that's fine. It's not a problem. You can also vary it depending on how well your student's doing by doing less pointing yourself and perhaps just read the word and have them repeat and point if they're able to do that. So you do what works. It's not written in stone. Do what works with your student. The fourth step is the comprehension check. After the material is presented, practice with yes and no questions. If necessary, you may have to teach yes and no, as I did in the video, by nodding and shaking my head with yes and no. And then point to something in the picture and ask a yes or no question. Is this a whatever? And make sure you mix them up between yes and no. And the student can say yes, or they can give you a thumbs up or a nod, something to show they understand. Depending on the success of the comprehension check, you can revisit presentation and practice if you need to. You can also use the QR code, which we'll talk about in a minute. And we mentioned that, I think, in the lesson planning too. The last step is enrichment, to expand the lesson wider or deeper. And you can follow up with expansion activities related to the lesson, such as asking, where are you from, or what country are you from, since that's something that was in the lesson already. Once you teach a complete lesson a few times, the steps usually become automatic, and you'll find that it flows along very easily from one step to the next without any conscious effort. And you don't have to be rigid about it either. Get all the material in, but if you don't do it precisely, as the book says, that's really not a problem either. Okay. All right, here's the QR code. If you decide your student would benefit from repeating the lesson independently, you can use this. You and your student can download an app for linking to the QR codes. You'll see them in Ventures, both in the teacher and student editions. Your phone camera will probably also work. So show your student how to use these study aids if they don't know already. The QR codes provide audio so the student can listen to the lessons on their own. Now you should be able to scan the code on this slide. If you have your phone there, give it a try. Give us a thumbs up if you were successful. Anybody getting it? Can't see very many
Always
people.
just audio. It's always just audio.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, anybody have any luck with that? Some of you did, yes, good. Oh, there goes the cattail again. Okay. If you're using this book, you can, of course, experiment it on your own with it and then work with your student on using it. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next slide. All right, this is a page from the high beginner level, which is a couple levels up from the one we just looked at. Notice that the lesson is presented in the same way as the lower level example. It follows the same format with vocabulary words, corresponding pictures. You'll follow the same 5 steps that we already talked about. So now I want to see if as a group we can apply some of the steps to this particular lesson. So what are some exploratory questions you might ask to gauge your students' knowledge? You could, of course, begin with the general, what do you see? But what are some other things you might ask? This is a more complicated picture than the other ones. Anybody have any ideas they want to share?
What are the people doing?
Okay, that's a very good one.
Where do you think this location is?
Good. Okay. Where are they? Yep.
Where are they?
Yep. Remember to keep your own vocabulary kind of simple. To start with, at least until you know what your students' vocabulary level is. Okay, those are very good examples you all gave. So after the exploratory questions, let's pretend that we have already then presented and practiced all the vocabulary words that are up here. So you might want to take a look at these words up here. And it also says, describe the people and what are they doing. So that's all part of what's covered in this lesson that we would be teaching in the presentation part. So pretend we've done that. Now, what might you ask as questions for comprehension? And remember, the yes or no format.
Are they adults?
Well, that's not part of your vocabulary.
Larry, okay.
So try to, I mean, maybe that would be okay. It says describe the people. So yeah, you might have talked about that they're adults if your student knows that word.
Does the man in the blue jogging suit have an ice cream cone?
Okay, that's a good example.
That's not too easy.
Is the man wearing a red shirt?
Okay, that would be a good no question.
Have gray hair.
Okay. All right, so there are quite a few things you could ask, you know, about the different colors and the striped skirt and the different hair colors and all that sort of thing. All right. Now, finally, what could an extension or expansion activity be? What kind of questions could you ask that would take it a little bit farther than exactly what's in the picture?
Maybe you could ask what they could find in that store that has earrings and more on it.
Okay, that might be an idea.
Have you ever been to a store that sells earrings, and what else do they have? Something like that.
Okay. How about,
What kind of hair do you have?
right, or your family? Yes. That would be a good one. You might have already asked, what are the people doing? And they would have said shopping. So you might say something like, do you like to shop?
Mm.
What do you like to shop for? Where do you like to shop?
Yep.
And then you have the man eating ice cream. Do you like ice cream? What kind of ice cream do you like? What flavor? They might not know flavor, so maybe kind, but you know, something like that. So there are a lot of things with a picture that has a lot of stuff in it that you can do quite a bit of talking about different things. Okay, you had good ideas, and you may get ideas from what they say when you do the exploratory part earlier.
Right.
All right. Now we're going to go on to the Challenger series.
Okay, remember that the Challenger Adult Reading Series is for basic learners. So these are students who already speak English and are really generally focusing on improving vocabulary, reading, and writing. So a typical lesson is what you're seeing in front of you. The first lesson in the unit will start with the lesson 10 phonics. They're going to emphasize phonics. And in this case, they're focusing on silent letters. They could focus on diphthongs or double letters or any vowel combinations, but they're going to carry this particular phonics lesson throughout the unit. Then each lesson will have a vocabulary, introductory vocabulary set of words, a reading selection, comprehension questions, word study activities, and writing. And this is, I'm sorry, did somebody say something? Okay, so this is set up on purpose to be very repetitive because the students that you have like to know what they're going to be doing. It can be very upsetting for some students if the format of your lessons changes a lot. So this is really great for keeping that predictable format. Also, the main characters are introduced in lesson 1, and they're often brought back through stories throughout the book. Again, this format supports students who are not comfortable with new or unfamiliar patterns. Now we'll look more closely at the lesson elements. Words for study. These words for studies are the vocabulary that the student must understand before reading the selection in order to be successful in his understanding. I am a huge fan of pre-teaching vocabulary. I will spend a lot of time on that because I think that vocabulary, it's the building blocks of language. You know, without a good vocabulary, you're going to have real trouble. So in this case, I don't start by asking them what these words mean. I will usually start by saying, for instance, can you show me a word that has a short I sound? Check the understanding of consonants or vowel sounds, sorry. Can you show me words with double letters? I just want to make sure that they're seeing the letters. Can you show me a word that has a smaller word in it? In other words, I'm looking for root words and I'm looking for suffixes or prefixes. So I'll ask a variety of questions. And then only then will I ask them about the definition. So for instance, I might say, sometimes I'll say, what does this word mean? But they usually don't have that language, but I will ask them to use the word in a sentence or to give me a synonym. And if they can do that, then I'm fine. If they don't have any idea of what the word means, then I will try to act it out if I can. For instance, breath. I won't say this is air that goes into the lungs and comes out. I'll usually go and hold my breath. Give them a visual as well as an oral so that they can understand what breath means. And they'll remember that picture very often. After the vocabulary, then I talk about the story in the photo. I'm going to ask, I usually tell people, but can I have a volunteer? If you were introducing this reading selection and you had this story in order to kind of activate their prior knowledge, what kinds of questions might you ask a student about this photo? Any ideas? You want them to get into the photo, right? So that they know they can predict what the reading is going to be about. Anybody know, if you couldn't read those words, what would you think the story was about looking at that photo?
An accident?
Yes, a car accident. Good, good. What kind of questions might you ask your student before you read? Remember, these students have language.
How do they think the accident happened?
Good, good question. Or even, have you ever been in an accident?
That was my first choice. Yeah. Have you ever
Good.
been?
That's right. Is this a serious accident or is this a fender bender? So, you know, all of that kind of thing. So really use the photos because we do not have a lot of photos in this book. It's not like Ventures. This book focuses on text in words more than photos. Okay. For the comprehension activities, and they are in every book, they're not only teaching comprehension, in other words, they're checking, did you understand the story? They're very, very subtly checking grammar. For instance, of those 3 words, they're asking you to fill in the blank in the right position. If the student wants to fill in Andy vote instead of wrote, you're going to note, he doesn't really understand verb tenses. You won't necessarily call him. You might just say, try something else. Don't go into a huge grammar lesson. But what I'm saying is that keep this in the back of your mind, that this is also a check, not only on comprehension, but on grammar and understanding of word parts. Notice that all of these words are from the unit focus or from the lesson focus, except the very last set, which goes day, way, and lay. And that has to do with the phonics taught in the previous unit. So there's a lot of spiraling back to make sure the student hasn't forgotten. Okay. Word study. I love word study because I love words. This one is, and I find that sometimes I can't answer these. Don't be alarmed if you have problems with these. For instance, look at number 8. I struggled with that one. Numb, that was my first tendency too. But then to me, it's kind of like, well, numb is an emotion. It's a lack of emotion. Anyway, yeah. So, and it's interesting when you see and the student asks you and you say, why did you choose that one? Sometimes the reasoning is right on. Look at number 3. They might say, well, I don't see. You walk with, you drive. These are all methods of transportation. And then you get them to narrow it down. Yeah, you're right. You can transport yourself by foot, but then narrow it down, you know, well, is there something else about the other 3 that isn't true about foot? Anyway, okay. Then you go into writing. What are some things to do after a car accident? These are the kind of things that take them beyond the actual lesson. And this is a good chance to understand what, you know, have they been in accidents before? It's a good way to introduce some survival skills. Talk about property damage versus human, you know, life and limb and that kind of stuff. And when you have to report to the police and when you don't, it's a good chance to bring that in. And then finally, continue the story of what happens after. I think that last section was, they want the student to finish the story. What happens next? What do you think, predicting? So basically, that's the difference between what Caroline presented in Ventures and the format of the Challenger book. Both of them, however, have extension activities. Challenger provides a lot of online enrichment activities, such as puzzles and games. And it has collaborative worksheets and an arcade for interactivities as well. One caveat when you're assigning homework, remember that a lot of our students are very busy. They have jobs, they have full-time family commitments. Give them homework, give them the chance to move on, but don't be disappointed if it's not done. Just, you know, decide to maybe do it in class instead. So any comments on teaching vocabulary or how these 2 books handle vocabulary? No? Okay, then.
All right. I'll get myself organized here for the next one.
You know, I had windows open and I could hear a helicopter or something, so I had to pop up and close my windows before I unmuted myself.
Okay. All right. Did any other people come in while I was?
I didn't get
Well, I couldn't
anything.
see anything. Okay, I was
Well,
trying to.
you got William Noonan, right?
No, I didn't.
Oh, he came
I
in,
want
yeah.
to make sure I give everybody credit for being here. That's here. Okay. And I see there's some chat things in here. Does this have to do with, any of it have to do with?
These are ideas for questions you
Questions?
could ask for extension.
Okay, all right. Nothing we need to answer for anybody right now. Okay. All right, let's go on then to, wait a minute. And set myself up right here. Okay. All right. There we go.
Okay. Pronunciation is important, and it can be difficult to teach and to learn. You should always make it a part of your ESL lessons. During any lesson, you'll see which words your student has trouble pronouncing, and you can work on those words. After we introduce some principles for teaching pronunciation, we'll look at how to practice making and describing English sounds, and we'll show you a process for teaching sounds. Then we'll suggest activities that you can do with your student to improve their pronunciation. The first thing you should know is that a student's native language influences how they speak and even how they hear English. Our brain trains themselves to distinguish the speech sounds that are familiar to us. Some sounds may be new to an ESL student. Speaking English requires different tongue and lip placement and different mouth movements than many ESL students are used to. Even native English speakers may have trouble distinguishing between sounds, and this can interfere with reading and spelling. There are three major reasons students have problems with individual sounds. First is that the sound is new to the student. For example, because French has no sound for th, a French speaker learning to say thank in English might say sank or tank instead. The second reason the student may have trouble is that the sound exists in the student's native language, but in English it comes in a place that's strange to them. For example, in the Khmer language, there is the sound s or s, but not at the end of a word. So a Cambodian learning English will tend to drop final S sounds, and they might pronounce bus as ba or peace as p. And then third, the sound might not exist in the student's native language, but it might be similar to another sound that does. For example, a Spanish speaker learning English might have difficulty distinguishing between the vowel sounds in the words bit and beat.
Mhm.
Spanish sound system has the long E, but not the short I. So Spanish speakers tend to pronounce both these words just the same.
Yeah.
It's a good idea to do a bit of research on the native language of your student. Compare their alphabet to the English alphabet. Compare the sounds of their language to the sounds of English. The tutor information book has a lot more specific information that you can refer to on this topic. Second principle of pronunciation instruction is that adult second language learners usually don't just pick up good pronunciation. The older the students are and the longer they've been speaking their native languages, the more training their ears and mouths have had in hearing and speaking non-English sounds. They need direct, explicit instruction in English pronunciation, in its sounds, its rhythm, and intonation. And then they need lots of practice. Listen carefully to how your student makes sounds and model English sounds for them. This can be stressful for your student though, so practice new sounds in small chunks.
There are several types of sounds. Voiced sounds are made using your vocal cords, while unvoiced sounds are made with your breath. Nasal sounds come through your nose. Continuants are sounds that you can make as long as you have breath, but stop sounds cannot be held and are gone as soon as you make them. Recognizing these differences can help you teach the student how to make sounds and can also help you choose practice words to improve pronunciation. The text in the box up at the top shows how you might see letters and sounds represented in your textbooks. The letters between the slashes represent the sound of that letter, and the letters without the slashes represent the name of the letter. Before we teach students to make the sounds in English, we need to be sure that we can make the sounds correctly ourselves. It helps to break the process into 4 steps. First, you get your lips and mouth in the correct position. Second, you produce the sound. Third, you stop the sound. And fourth, you relax your mouth position. If you reverse the 3rd and 4th steps, the stopping and relaxing steps, you'll get unwanted vowel sounds added to your consonants. For example, when making the sound for V, which is if you relax your mouth position and open your mouth while still making the sound, you'll suddenly be saying V instead of V. So I'm going to start out correctly, and then I'm going to relax my mouth position and show you what happens. V. And I didn't try to do that, but when I opened my mouth, that's what happened. Try that for yourself. Try doing that. So you want to keep your mouth in the same position until you stop the sound. Remember, we don't say V Allentown, so we don't want that sound on there. In teaching sounds, we use a variation of the explicit instruction model. The explain and model steps are combined. And we have 2 types of guided practice, listening and speaking. For example, to teach the sound for L, I would explain that I first touch the tip of my tongue to the roof of my mouth just behind my upper teeth. And I keep it there throughout the sound, and the air comes out around my tongue. I use my vocal cords to make the sound. So that sound sounds like ooh, ooh. And if you put your tongue up there before you start making the sound, you will not get you won't get that sound on the front of the L. So now I want to practice these letters on the slide. I want you to be careful not to add vowel sounds at the end of B and D. We don't want to hear B and D. And just think of a short word like big or dig and clip it off after the consonant sound. And don't add a vowel to the beginning of ooh and we don't want to hear O and So you can just start to say a short word like lead or red and just continue that initial consonant sound, that initial sound, instead of saying the rest of the word. So let's do these sounds together as I point to them. If I taught a student that the sound for L is O instead of the student might sound out this word in the box as illiteracy or think it was illiteracy, which entirely changes the meaning of the word. So it really is important. when preparing to teach a sound, you can record yourself or simply just really listen to yourself and listen to how the sound works when you say it in a word. So remember that we don't say river, leg, or ish. So when you put it in the word, does the word sound right or not? It can also help for the tutor to exaggerate or stretch out the word as the student learns to pronounce the sound. For example, in Japanese, there's a sound kind of between an R and an L. So the sounds for R and L can be very challenging for Japanese speakers. One of our tutors had a Japanese student who had a lot of difficulty being understood by others when she said bleed and breathe. And this was a really big problem because she's a nurse and she really needed people to understand whether she said a patient had stopped bleeding or breathing. So they practiced a lot with bleed and breathe, just to get her to be able to feel where her tongue goes when she makes those sounds. Okay, these charts show voiced and unvoiced letter pairs in these two boxes. In each pair, you use your vocal cords to make the voiced sound and just your breath to make the unvoiced sound. Your mouth position is the same for both sounds in each pair. For example, if I make the sound for V, which is that's a voice sound, and then I stop using my vocal cords, I'll suddenly be making the sound for F. So it would be like, and my mouth didn't change a bit. Try that. So you just stop using your vocal cords and it turns into an F. You can help your student get the correct mouth position by watching you and then themselves in a mirror or their cell phone camera. They can compare their mouth position to yours. You can also show your student the difference between voiced and unvoiced sounds by holding a slip of paper in front of your mouth or a tissue can be dangled down because it'll blow. And make the voiced and unvoiced sounds. So I'm going to show you what one of them looks like. So the difference between the B and the P, the paper was still with the B. So if you have a slip of paper, get it out. If you don't, the other thing you can do is you can you can put your hand in front of your mouth and you can feel your breath for the unvoiced sound, the and you can feel the puff of air when you do the P. What I want to do is I want you, along with me, to make each of these pairs as I point to the letter and use your paper or your hands. So we've got Okay, so all of those work pretty well with the paper, except for the S and Z. You probably noticed that you couldn't really either feel anything or notice anything with the S sound. That's because the air kind of comes out down to the sides of your mouth. So you can do something else with that. You can put your fingers on your voice box and make the sounds and zzz. And when you do that, when you make the Z, you'll feel vibration because you're using your vocal cords. Or this is always, I think this one's more fun, actually. Put your fingers in your ears and make the sound for S and the sound for Z. So with the Z, it should sound like you have a B in your head. That voiced sound, it vibrates in there. So that's, I think that's fun. People have trouble hearing the difference between the sounds for W and WH. And I've had people argue with me that there's no difference, but there truly is. And it is important for spelling to try to be able to hear these. So think about the word win, W-I-N, and think about how you say that. You say win, win. And then think about W-H-E-N, when, when. The WH is sort of like just a soft blowing sound, where the W sound sounds almost like ooh, ooh, when, and then when. So they are different. When you make nasal sounds correctly, the and you can often feel the vibration of those by putting your hand on top of your head. If you do you may feel vibration there, or your fingers on your temples. I can't feel it here, but I can feel it here. If you wonder if nasal sounds truly come through your nose, everybody try holding your nose and making the sound for M.
Oh,
You should get no sound. So they are truly nasal. The tutor information book has about 13 or 14 pages that has many other sounds and sound combinations with descriptions of how to make the sounds, along with more information to help with specific pronunciation problems. Oh, I realized I hadn't clicked the last thing for the nasal sounds. Okay.
So,
Is it possible to ask a quick question, or should I just put it in the chat?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
As an English teacher, I had so many students who couldn't say in English. I mean, I'm talking about high school students, even AP students, who cannot pronounce the R correctly. I've met many people who are very smart, and no matter how I tried to help, they could never do it correctly. Do you know why that is?
I actually worked as a speech therapist in my early days. It's a very common problem, and some of it is because the articulation of the R isn't real sharp, and that it is a tongue positioning thing, and it's an ear control thing. It's a very common error.
It is.
Barbara Walters. We always used to make fun of Barbara Walters because
Yeah.
for a long time she said, Barbara Walters.
Yeah.
Well, it does help to try to get somebody to, to say the word and not finish the word. That may not correct it. It is a difficult letter to make. Most people can learn to make it, I think, but some won't. And then you have your Spanish speakers that roll the R's. And most of us can't do that. So, but if they recognize it, can understand it, sometimes perfection isn't necessary. So, okay, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time for that.
Okay, so this slide is a summary of ways to help your student distinguish voiced, unvoiced, and nasal sounds, just as we did in the previous examples. You can take a minute to review the slide. It is primarily a summary of what we've already said. Many ESL students are frustrated with their pronunciation. They may avoid talking with native English speakers because they are not confident in their ability to be understood. Respond to their frustration with plenty of encouragement and praise when they do say something correctly. A student's frustration builds when they speak and the other person doesn't understand them. Probably the student has just said something the only way that they know how, so asking them to repeat it again and again can become embarrassing. When this happens, you can use a follow-up question instead. Try to get at the meaning of what the student is saying without saying to them, "I don't understand." Then you can help your student practice saying it. Sometimes, if you ask your student to write it for you, that'll clear things up right away, and you can know what to practice. Sounds aren't truly learned until they become automatic. So you do need to practice new sounds often with your students, since practice builds confidence. Remember to practice listening as well as speaking. Students need to be able to hear the sounds and the differences between them before they can produce them. And remember also that the goal of speaking is functional communication. If your student can be understood, then they should be considered successful. Perfection isn't necessary, and make sure your student realizes this.
Vowel sounds are especially important for being understood, and they can be difficult to produce correctly. Long vowel sounds are the same as the names of the letters, which makes them seem easy, but they may be difficult for ESL students to learn depending on their native language, because the language may have different sounds for the same letters or not have that sound at all. Another tricky part with long vowels is that each long vowel can be spelled in several ways. For example, long E can be spelled as E, like in we, EE in feet, EA in week, EY in key, and E consonant E in peat. Plus, feet and week can both be spelled with either EE or EA, depending on the meaning. Short vowels are the most commonly used, but many students and even tutors have a lot of trouble with the short vowel sounds, particularly the E and the I. Using the keywords on the slide, if you begin saying the word and stop the sound before the consonant, you'll have the correct sound. So we have apple, ah, ed, inch, olive, ah, up, short vowels are further complicated when they're followed by the letter R. This changes the vowel sound completely, and O in fork becomes or, A in car becomes R, and E in Bert, I in bird, and U in burn all become There are about 25 different vowel sounds in English, and many of them written with vowel combinations such as in book, oo in boot, oi in boy and oil, or aw in Paul, paw and bought. We're not going to go over all of these, but I think you'll recognize them and be able to isolate the sounds in words when you encounter them with your student. So you'll be able to help the student learn them. Next thing we have is minimal pairs. This is a technique often used to help ESL students hear the difference between two sounds so that they can then produce the sounds. A minimal pair consists of two words that differ only in one sound. Minimal pairs have to do with the way the word sounds and not necessarily how it's spelled. One really good way to work with minimal pairs is to ask your student to listen to two sounds or two words and tell if they're the same and different. So you have pill, pill is the same, pill, bill is different. But first you might have to teach the meanings of same and different. To do this, show your student two identical objects, and at the same time, you can show them a card that says same, and then show them two objects that are very different, not like a blue pencil and a yellow pencil, but something not a pencil if you're using a pencil, and your card for different. Notice I even have a clue on these cards with different shapes on the top. Okay, so that's a good way to teach same and different. And also, if your student is a real beginner, instead of having them say same or different, it's much easier to have them point to a card saying same and different instead, you know, in the beginning. Let's see. Where am I? As your student improves with their listening, you might help them hear differences without giving them any visual cues, such as being able to see your mouth. You can try covering your mouth or speaking on the phone without FaceTime or WhatsApp. For example, in the words man and nan, your student would be able to see a difference in your mouth position. So hiding your mouth could help them focus on listening. But you wouldn't want to do this until they get pretty good. You don't want to start with somebody that's struggling already and do that to them. For more examples, you can Google ESL minimal pairs and get lots of examples. The next thing that you can practice is called tense lax pairs. And these are words that have long and short vowels. And it's useful when there's no distinction between the two sounds in the student's native language, such as the long E and short I in Spanish, like in beat and bit. Have your student watch as you say the long E sound and exaggerate your mouth position. And then say the short I, showing the more relaxed mouth position. There's more tension in your mouth position when saying the long E sound. Have your student copy you, perhaps watching in a mirror or on their webcam as you make the sounds together. This helps your student to actually feel the difference when they make these sounds and compare them. And they can compare their mouth position to yours. Now, I'd like to do these sounds together and try exaggerating your mouth position. And I'm going to show you what that looks like for E. E, everybody do E and kind of stretch your mouth, E, and then eh, eh, and then beat, bit, beat, bit. And you should be able to feel that difference. And if you can help your student to feel that difference, they may be able to start hearing the sound that they're not able to hear. Okay, on to the next one.
So we use non-standard English all the time in our everyday speech, and it differs from what we usually see in print. As native English speakers and experienced readers, we make the connection automatically between gonna and going to. But our students can have problems with when what they hear doesn't match what they read. You'll need to help your student understand the meaning of these expressions. Remember to always consider your students' needs and goals when deciding how much to work on pronunciation. Consider these two different people. The biochemist from India may be very motivated to perfect his pronunciation as much as possible. He may be willing to devote a lot of time and effort to it because it's vital for him to be well understood by his colleagues. For him, success in pronunciation might be defined as speaking very much like a native English speaker. On the other hand, we had a student who always pronounced E-G-G-S as yeggs. When she saw the letters E-G-G-S, she knew it was yeggs. She was a respected matriarch of her community. Everyone understood her, and she had no real need to change. Improving pronunciation is an important goal, but you do need to be careful not to work on it so much that you frustrate your student. The goal is better communication. however that is defined by your student. Okay, we have a number of websites here that are great for pronunciation practice. We're going to take a quick look at Learning Chocolate. And this is one that is excellent for students to hear how to pronounce words from their phone when they're not in class with you. Each topic has a lot of practical words and phrases, all with audio. The free website too.
Okay, so we're gonna do appointment words here.
Okay.
So this is kind of neat because you have your audio.
Insurance card. Social security number. Doctor.
Okay, and there's lots of other things on this website, but that's just an example. So the audio is really great on it.
Okay, the next website that we have on the slide there is a dictionary for ESL learners. And this is a good one because when the student looks up the word or the meaning of a word, the pronunciation is also included. Then the third website, Color Vowel Chart, is great for listening to and learning the vowel sounds. When you have time, poke around these websites and read about how useful they can be. And these are just a few of the sites that are out there. There are a lot of good sites for pronunciation. Explicit instruction with an explanation, accurate modeling, and lots of practice is what works best when working to improve pronunciation with your student. And also, again, remember, communication, not necessarily perfection, is the goal. So are there any questions?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm wondering, would it be good for us to practice our own pronunciation? Because I don't tend to think about that. I think I just run the words together. So I'm thinking that wouldn't be helpful for people that need to hear that vowel sound first before you run it together in a word. Maybe.
I think that's true. You do need to think about how you say things. And you certainly don't want to teach somebody an incorrect pronunciation just because it's worked for you for a while.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, it's time for a break. It's 7:35, 5 minutes, back at 7:40. And we will do the other two topics for the night.
Carolyn, I just
Yep.
wanted to point out that Ray Zahn did come in about
Yes.
7. Yeah, good.
Yep. Okay.
Carolyn,
Yes.
when I was learning Spanish, one thing that really helped and I started progressing very fast was when I could actually understand where the breaks were between the words so that I
Yes.
knew what individual words I was dealing with. Because otherwise, and it's a kind of a joke with me now, I had a customer that I gave her last name as Portillo, Portillo. And for a long time, I thought that was a good Spanish word and it had to mean something, but I couldn't find it in the dictionary. And then when I heard it in a song, it was actually 3 words, Portillo. And I was like, oh my gosh. I've been looking for the meaning of this word for forever, and it was 3 words, but
That's
as
a really
my
good point.
Spanish progressed, I didn't have that problem anymore, but
Yeah, that is a big problem. I listen to Spanish and I can't, it seems like they go so fast and I can't tell what's a word and what isn't a word. And
but
it
it's just
seems
like
like
English.
and it seems like they use more words to say the same thing than we do, to me. Or more syllables at least, or something. It seems like it's a longer, everything seems to take more
Right.
to say the same thing.
I agree with what was said earlier, that vocabulary is key. because sure, you have to learn grammar and stuff like that and pronunciation, but when you have like 1,000 words, you speak like you're in first grade. When you have 10,000 words, you speak like you're in fifth grade. When you have 100,000 words, you speak like you're in college. And I really, it's just learning the words, learning the vocabulary, so that when you hear a word in a sentence, it doesn't stump you, you know?
Right. Yeah, you can't do the other things without without the words to do it with. So you're exactly right. Yeah. Well, you're right about being able to tell the difference between where the words start and stop. That's one of the things that we sometimes have to deal with people, particularly with learning disabilities. They can't tell, the phonemic awareness is not there, and they can't. And the first step to working with that is telling words in a sentence. And then you move to syllables, and then you move to the sounds. But you start with the big part of what is a word, you know, which are the words. And people tend to misunderstand because they don't know where the words start and stop. So,
and then the word size varies so much. You know, you could have a 2-letter word or a 10-letter word.
Well, we had I had some examples that I used to use of people that are words that were being misunderstood and causing a problem, and I can't remember now what they're. Can't remember the example now.
English words.
Yeah, but it was really funny. You know, when you heard what was correct and then what somebody was actually thinking they heard. I have to think about that and see if I can come up with it.
Like, if you need one in Spanish, you have it now.
Yeah.
Portillo.
Somebody else was saying something. I don't know.
Yeah, I interrupted her. I'm sorry.
No, I'm stuck on this too. It seems like there were some songs that were very, very frequently misrepeated. You know, that, I can't remember. One of them I think has to do icicles. I think icicles is the wrong word, but everybody's saying it with icicles. You know, ran together.
Right. Well, my daughter, when she was young, thought that this meant policeman, and if you tried to tell her it wasn't policeman, she would get angry. She was like 3 or 4 years old. You know, policeman. Be like, cool dude, policeman, power to the people. You know how you teach your kids tricks so you can show off.
Let's see, I'm looking up my example here. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, energetic. People hear it as INNER and then JETIC. And it doesn't make any sense.
I have to look up words all the time. I mean, I'm not a dumb person, but I have to look up words all the time to get the right spelling. Spell honorary.
Well, too many
ORNERY
words don't follow the rules.
It is OORN, honorary. That's one that I had a hard time with even finding in the dictionary because I was in the wrong letter.
There's also words that sound similar but are not the same word.
Right.
Homonyms that sound the same, but they're not the same word, or like words that could be plural or singular, like the word deer. It could mean one deer or it could mean a group of deer. So there's all these confusing rules and
I like to use the OUTH sound to show how complicated pronunciation is in English. Think about dot, though, owl, tough, rough. You know.
I have a student working on that right now. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
Ooh, there's another one. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to grammar.
Okay, I will start in just 1 second.
Thank you.
Share sound, optimized. Boom. And let me move this slideshow.
Um,
Let me go back. Okay.
yeah, there we go. Okay. So if vocabulary words are the building blocks of language, grammar is the glue that binds them all together. Good grammar aids in effective communication. And yet many people, both native and non-native speakers, find grammar rules perplexing. They've grown up disliking or fearing the subject. This topic will show you how 2 of the instructional series that we use take a different approach to teaching grammar. So take a minute to look at the slide. These are the topics that we'll cover in our discussion of grammar. If your student says they lives on the block, or if you hear the girl picked up his book, or I don't have no money today, then your student is struggling with basic grammar. And again, these are the categories that we'll be addressing. We have and will continue to emphasize in this workshop the importance of explicit instruction when you're teaching pronunciation, alphabetics, comprehension, when you're teaching strategies like identifying main ideas or making predictions. Remember that with explicit or direct instruction, the teacher explains and models the concept, and the students practice it with the teacher, and then apply the concepts independently. This is also known as the I do, we do, you do model. The Council's beginning level curriculum materials, however, generally do not teach grammar explicitly. That is, they don't teach grammar rules using the direct instruction in the style of the 1970s grammar books. Rather, proper grammar usage is demonstrated through dialogues, conversations, and readings, and then reinforced with practice. This integrated approach mimics the way that young children learn to speak grammatically. The idea is that new speakers will recognize often repeated speech patterns, and they'll generate new language based on these patterns or unspoken rules. However, when the student needs help with a particular aspect of grammar, then it makes sense to use specific direct techniques to help them. This may be especially true when the student's first language does not have the same grammar as English, such as making contractions with nouns and verbs, as in Spanish, or the use of gender-specific pronouns. But generally, lessons integrate grammatical instruction. So here's an example from a Beginning Ventures ESL book that integrates grammar. The lesson doesn't teach about pronouns as a class of nouns, or how to conjugate the verb to be in all the persons or tenses. It only explains the grammar that the student needs to understand the reading that they're doing and to communicate with the teacher. My personal experience has been that beginning students just don't have the vocabulary needed to understand grammatically why something is said one way or another. So I model, but I don't explain. I took a Italian for Travelers course a few years ago, and that teacher, if you ever asked a grammar question, she would say, "You don't want to know. This is how we say it." Okay. You know, there may be more advanced students who really do need to know the rules, but those are mostly not the folks you'll be working with through the Literacy Council. I can't stress enough the importance of repetition and practice in teaching English. This is especially true for grammar practice. Repetition is built into the instructional materials, and if you sense that your student needs more practice, then go for it. Do more practice. The example from this Ventures lesson implicitly demonstrates 2 grammar rules. First, when asking questions, the verb precedes the subject. And second, when you're starting a sentence with an interjection or an appositive, the word is set off by a comma. We don't try to overtly teach those rules at this level. We just model and repeat and rely on the student to pick up the pattern. These series are created for class situations. Group activities in the instruction book can easily be adapted to small group or one-to-one teaching, however. For instance, the instructions in this activity direct the students to ask their classmates, "Are you from Columbia?" If you're only working with one student, you can change this activity and ask your student, "Is your brother from?" or "Is your friend from?" or ask the student to ask you about where you're from. You should always feel free to adapt any exercise to meet the individual or small group needs of the people you're working with. In this example from the Challenger Level 3 workbook, the grammar instruction is completely integrated. The main focus of the activity is on sentence structure, but the secondary focus is on punctuation. Here, if you need to remind the student that sentences start with a capital letter, that's fine, but you're not going to try to teach a full lesson on capitalization at this point. Okay, and finally, here's an example of how you can integrate grammar, for example, using the active voice. This activity page is primarily a vocabulary activity, but you can encourage the student to create sentences with themselves as the person who is doing or feeling the action. We want you to be comfortable with knowing that you will not be expected to create your own grammar activities or to delve deeply into the whys and why nots of English usage. If the student asks, try to give them a brief answer as simply as you can, but recognize that for advanced students who might need more formal lessons, there are other resources that you can ask your coordinator to help you with. Most of the students you work with are not going to need the rules. They're going to need the practice. Any other questions? Okay.
Okay. This last session coming up is the longest one, but it is the last one. So that's, good news, bad news. And we're running just a little bit late. I hope you can bear with us. We're going to try and pick up a little bit if we can.
We had a lot of conversation tonight, which
Mhm,
stretched
which
things out a little bit, and that's
It's
good.
a good thing. Yeah, that's right. And we really do appreciate your interactivity. You're interacting with us, and there's quite a few opportunities in this session for you to put your opinions out there and let us know what you're thinking and help us get through this.
Let's see.
Okay, so far in this workshop, you have seen how listening and speaking, vocabulary, grammar, reading and writing are integrated into the lessons from the Ventures and the Challengers series. Now we want to talk a little more specifically about components of reading instruction and show you some teaching techniques you can use along with your books to expand and reinforce your lessons. These techniques will help you address your students' individual needs. Reading can be simply defined as the process of converting written symbols into words and sentences that communicate meaning. Now, this is a brief definition of a very interactive and dynamic process. Effective readers use strategies that are based on 4 groups or types of skill sets. Alphabetics describes the skills that are needed to decode words effectively. Vocabulary is the body of words used in the language, in this case, reading or print vocabulary. Fluency is the ability to read words quickly, accurately, and with expression. Lastly, comprehension is the ability to interact with and bring meaning to text. Both basic literacy and ESL students will need help with one or more of these components. Depending upon the student, a tutor may emphasize one or more component more than others, but good reading instruction develops skills in all 4 reading components. Reading is based on the understanding that letters and letter combinations represent the sounds of a spoken language. Mastering alphabetics means understanding that a spoken word consists of a sequence of individual sounds. This knowledge is fundamental to reading and understanding text. As the diagram illustrates, alphabetic skills are similar to the roots of a tree in that they must appear and be strengthened before the other reading components can grow and develop. When we read, we use a mix of techniques to decode the written word. This list begins with using the very smallest parts of a word, phonemic awareness, that's what makes up a sound, and moves through other ways of decoding, ending with the broadest technique, which is using context clues to figure out the meaning of a word. We'll give examples of how to teach using all of these techniques. Which ones you'll need and want to use will depend again on the level of your student. This slide shows the first chart in the Laubach Way to Reading series, an excellent tool for teaching phonics to a beginning reader. You'll remember that this is the same method we demonstrated with the Russian chart at the beginning of the workshop. It demonstrates how you can help someone who doesn't need English or who doesn't read at all. And now I am looking for a volunteer who will take part in this demonstration with me. Any volunteers? I'm not seeing any hands up.
I'll do it.
Okay, who said that? Jody? Great, thanks, Jody. Okay. I'm going to be the tutor and you'll be the student. This is a bird with a long tail and a round body. Say bird.
Bird.
This looks like a bird with a long tail and a round body. Say bird.
Bird.
This is the word bird. Read bird.
Bird.
Bird begins with the sound b. Say b.
B.
Again.
B.
Again.
B.
Again.
B.
The sound of this letter is b. The name of this letter is b. Say b again.
B.
What is the sound of this letter?
B.
What is the name of this letter?
B.
Good. And you would then proceed down through the chart. As you can see, the Laubach Teachers edition, by the way, has explicit instructions and scripts for you to use until you get used to this, and it does become second nature. You may not need to start at this basic level with your student, but we show you the process because it incorporates techniques that can be used to teach other kinds of materials in many different levels. First of all, while you're working with your student, move consistently from left to right, guiding the student with your finger or your cursor. Remember that adults learn well by association, so pictures are a good memory device. In the Laubach chart, there's a clear picture/symbol association. This approach is multi-sensory. Your student sees, hears, says, and later will write something all at once, which reinforces learning. Multi-sensory teaching is always helpful. When you can say read instead of say, do so. It's good to emphasize to your student that they are actually reading. Ask direct questions. What is the sound of this letter? Rather than indirect questions like the sound of this letter is fill in the blank. Indirect questions can be confusing for a student. Direct questions are easier for them to understand. If your student makes a mistake, go back to the known, in this case, the picture. Give your student a chance to figure it out, but don't let them hang on too long. Supply the answer if needed. Be consistent. Use the same words each time to elicit a response, and also as few words as possible, so that your student doesn't need to figure out what you're saying and what you're asking, and they can concentrate on their response instead. Give simple, honest praise often. Say, good, or that's great, or you got it. You might start with material a little easier than the student's real level. This provides a review and gives your student confidence. You can do this. Look how much you already know. And please remember, as we said in the pronunciation section, to make sure that you are making and teaching the sounds correctly without adding vowel sounds to the consonants. No buzz or ers. This is another example of a phonics-based material, this time using a page from the Voyager series. In this example, after you introduce the small and capital B in the, excuse me, your student will identify things in the picture that begin with the B sound. You write down the words, read them, and ask your student to read them and then write them. Your student chooses a key word to help them remember the letter and its sound. And you can use this process even without the book. The Voyager series is appropriate to use with students who's more advanced. As you can see, this lesson is not as structured. Plus, more is covered in each lesson. Writing is emphasized and the series is more learner-driven. For a true non-reader, the material on the previous slide, the Laubach method, might be better. Remember that your coordinator will help you decide which reading series is the best tool for your student.
A word pattern is a consistent letter or sound pattern that students can use to identify or to create new words. The column on the left is an example of the at word family. By adding different beginning sounds, students can create many words in that family. You can also use patterns to show phonics principles, such as how the silent E affects the sounds of vowels. You can practice substituting different vowels into a word pattern to create new words. Use this strategy before reading to introduce words that your student will see. This will help your student read the piece more fluently. After reading, you can do different activities to reinforce new word patterns. There are lots of hands-on activities that you can demonstrate and practice with. Okay, you see a paper slide on the screen. It's very easy to make a paper slide where you just are going to take a card, make a cut for the letters you're working with. Okay, I picked the same word family, the AKA word family, but I'm using blends at the front. So I can move it to make break, flake, shake, just as the word slide on the screen can go up and down to make bake, cake, or lake. It also works, for your final letters. Just put your slide in the other end, or for vowel sounds. As students advance, recognizing word parts helps them to decode longer, more complex words. Understanding root words, prefixes, suffixes, compound words, and the difference between plurals and possessives also helps with word meanings. This supports both vocabulary development and comprehension. Hands-on methods like this matching puzzle are great for word parts practice. Cut each matching pair in a different pattern to guarantee success. So your student has not just the clues from the words, but the clues from the cut to make sure they make the right match. Sight words are commonly used words that readers are taught to recognize immediately when they see them. They're learned as complete units. You use the shape of the word, the length, the specific letter combinations, or other clues to recognize sight words. Some examples of frequently used sight words are shown on the slide. Some words can't be easily sounded out phonetically, such as the numbers 1 and 2, and they really have to be taught as sight words. Teach sight words from a passage before your student reads it by writing them down, reading them to the student, and having the student read the words. Flashcards are one of the best ways to practice sight words after reading. Practice new and frequently used words until they become sight words. It's a tangible measure of progress, and it's a great motivator when your student sees the list of known sight words growing as their stack of index cards get taller. To use context clues effectively, students must recognize and understand enough of the rest of the words to help them with the words that they don't know. So here's a challenging example. I need a volunteer to read the first sentence on the slide, inserting the word that belongs in the blank. Anybody? If you want to unmute yourself and call out, that's fine because I can't see everybody.
Vegetables.
Right, read the whole sentence, please.
Cindy wants to grow vegetables in her garden.
Great, great. Now that one had a good clue. The next one might be a little harder because all of the blanks don't have clues. So anybody want to try the second one?
I will. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Emily.
With the price of vegetables going up, people are trying to grow their own.
Good, good. Okay, so sorry, as students advance and become independent readers, the strategies that help them apply the decoding skills that they've been discussing become more automatic. Good readers scan text to understand the overall meaning. They can use context to figure out what a word might mean. They may use visual cues, such as the beginning letter of the word or the shape and length of the word to help decode the word correctly. This is similar to how we recognize street names from a distance by the length and shape of the words on the sides. They may sound out the word and see if it matches a word they know. They might think about whether a word follows regular rules. If it doesn't, they might try different vowel sounds to see whether that helps decode the word or not. They might substitute in their head a different word that makes sense, write down the new word for looking up later, and continue reading. Good readers go through these strategies fairly quickly so that it doesn't disrupt their reading fluency. Okay, you can't get very far on sight words only, even though they're very important. You do have to have some decoding strategies for the words that aren't up to sight word recognizability. As students become more confident, they'll enjoy reading more and use these strategies on their own.
Okay. Good alphabetic skills help students to read new words that they will understand if the words already exist in their oral vocabulary. The more words the students know, the better they understand what they read. But they will probably have trouble reading and understanding words that aren't part of their oral vocabulary and will need to use other strategies, such as context for those words. For ESL students, vocabulary development creates a bridge between English and their own language. Building vocabulary is an essential skill for creating independent readers. Here are some basic principles and general guidelines for vocabulary instruction. First, identify and pre-teach unfamiliar words to your student so they know before reading. Second, repeat the vocabulary word often, at least 5 times. Your student will learn a new word better if they practice both speaking it and seeing it. Next, Vocabulary instruction should be both broad and deep. In other words, work to expand the size or breadth of your students' vocabulary and improve the depth of their understanding. Depth involves teaching nuanced differences in the meaning of words, like what's the difference between cheap and inexpensive, or to take and to bring, and explaining different word meanings within specific contexts. For example, words like pool, stand, and racket. Finally, students need to know 3 word learning strategies: how to use common prefixes and suffixes, how to use context clues, and how to use a dictionary. A reading vocabulary lesson has 3 parts: before, during, and after reading. Different strategies are used for each of these stages. Before reading is when you preview the lesson text to identify words your students may not know. As you saw when we discussed vocabulary earlier, the books that we showed you have already done this step for you. But if you are using other materials, you may need to do this step yourself. Then pre-teach the words using direct instruction before your student reads, as we showed you with the Challenger example. Limit new vocabulary words in a lesson to a manageable number. 5 is a good number for a beginning student and up to 10 for intermediate or advanced. During the reading stage, your student can further study the pre-taught vocabulary as well as any additional unknown words that crop up. Except when practicing fluency, you can stop during reading to provide a definition when it's needed. This helps your student comprehend the text. After reading, provide activities to practice new vocabulary. Keep in mind not to use too many activities in one lesson, or you may overwhelm your student. There are many fun ways to help your student practice and expand vocabulary. Your handout has activities such as word charts, word builder, and word matrix that can add variety to your lessons. Off-the-shelf games can also be a lot of fun and will add variety, although you may have to adapt them a bit for virtual lessons. Games like Taboo and Password are great vocabulary builders. There are many vocabulary building games online that you can use with your student, or they can use their own. And you can also search Google Images on the fly using your phone or computer to find an image of a particular word or concept that is too difficult to explain. Words like jumper when used as a piece of clothing, or the word rust. A picture dictionary is helpful, not only for building vocabulary, but also for developing a dialogue and for communicating with your student. You can use the dictionary to illustrate words or issues or topics that come up during a lesson. The new Oxford Picture Dictionary, shown on the slide, illustrates the meaning of over 2,400 useful vocabulary words in the context of everyday living. It is great for teaching word categories because of its layout. The Literacy Council has many copies of the dictionary for you to borrow, but it's such a valuable resource that many of our tutors and their students have bought their own.
Fluent reading feels and sounds like conversation, and it helps us make connections between our oral vocabulary and written text. Fluent reading is supported by good alphabetic skills and a broad and deep vocabulary. When we read fluently, we can concentrate on understanding what we're reading rather than on the smaller pieces of the language. In the pre-workshop, you learned that fluency has 3 components: speed, accuracy, and expressiveness. When reading aloud, fluent readers read in phrases and add expression and intonation. Stress, rhythm, and intonation are all parts of expressiveness. When someone reads aloud fluently, it sounds very much like ordinary speech. Fluency improves comprehension in 2 ways. First, fluent readers recognize words automatically without thinking about them. This allows them to focus on comprehending the text. And second, fluent reading creates proper emphasis, rhythm, and inflection, which may not be apparent in the printed text. This also improves comprehension. Reading aloud makes it easy for students to hear themselves getting better. This increases their self-confidence as readers. So we teach fluency by reading aloud activities. Guided oral reading is repetitive reading with guidance from a teacher or a coach. Research shows that guided oral reading is the best way to improve fluency. In general, a teacher, parent, or peer reads a passage aloud, modeling fluent reading. Then students read the text, sometimes several times. The text should be at the student's independent reading level. Usually, reading the same text 4 times is sufficient. We'll look at 4 guided oral reading techniques. Choosing material that is of interest to your student will encourage them to read. Choose articles on sports or gardening or anything that relates to your student's life. For a mother who wants to read to her child, use children's books. Modeled reading is basically reading aloud. When parents read to their children, they're modeling reading. Students should have a copy of what you're reading so that they can follow along with their eyes. The text can be at a slightly higher level than you would normally use, but students still need to be able to follow along easily. In echo reading, you'll read each sentence, modeling proper pace and phrasing, and then the student reads after you until you've read the entire passage. Repeat the process from the beginning, gradually increasing the pace and the amount of text modeled at one time as the student improves. Repeat until the student can read the passage independently. Choral reading is reading aloud in unison with students. Because your student is reading with you, the passage should be at the student's independent reading level. During choral reading, when the student is reading confidently, the tutor can stop reading and listen, helping if necessary. In duet reading, the tutor and student read at the same time, which is similar to choral reading, but you'll use material that is new to the student and is a bit above their current reading level.
Duet reading helps students improve fluency and vocabulary by developing the ability to recognize words automatically rather than focusing on decoding. It helps them read faster and with more confidence. It can be used with students who have some reading ability, but who are reading hesitantly, word by word, or with no expression. We're going to do some duet reading. I've asked Carolyn to be the tutor, and she is going to she is going to show you how you can duet read. But you are all going to be the students. I want you to continue to mute, but as Carolyn starts, you should start with her at the same time. Now, don't struggle. If you can't keep up, don't panic. Just jump in when you can. Don't try to study or analyze the text when you see it. Just start reading. And don't get discouraged again if you can't keep up.
Anybody who isn't muted, please mute themselves, because when you talk and I talk at the same time, you won't be able to hear.
Okay.
All right, so now I'm going to change the slide and we're going to start reading immediately. Facial expressions and head movements. Can you tell how someone feels about you by reading body language? Authorities claim you can, from the look of scorn, however fleeting, to the subtle nods and bright eyes that say someone is receptive to your thoughts. Katie, 17, says, "My friend's mother doesn't like me. I know she doesn't." I asked Katie why she thought this. "Well, for one thing, she doesn't look at me when I talk to her," Katie explained. "She looks away toward the door or across the room as though she wants to escape. And sometimes she looks at me as if to say, 'You look funny in those clothes.' I guess it's the way her eyes look cold and her lips are pressed together. She doesn't need to say one negative word to me. The mother's body language has sent a message loud and clear." Okay, well, let's see, we need to go back. Oops. So what was that like?
You can unmute now.
Yeah.
And
Did, did,
I think I was having a hard time. It almost felt like a foreign language, but then I realized that it was the phonetic spelling of these words. And that
Right.
helped me when I made that connection. But when I first looked at it, I was like, what is that?
it was confusing, right?
Yes.
It was. And I wasn't sure how to start. I was like,
And it probably took quite a bit of concentration. If you did it very long, it would be tiring for you, I would think.
Yes.
Did anybody feel like they got better toward the end than they did at the
Yes, we
beginning?
got better.
Yeah. When we do this in person, we start slowly and have to increase our pace to keep ahead of the class, you know, to keep pushing them because they get better so fast. But when on Zoom, we can't hear you, so we can't do that. But anyway, hopefully we were trying to put you in the shoes of the student again to show you what it's like.
thank you very much, Carolyn, for that demonstration. Okay, duet reading. This activity, this new one, is not duet reading. It's an activity that emphasizes how emotion and meaning are conveyed in fluent reading. Say it like you mean it. Show students how meaning can change depending upon what emphasis you put on a word when you read the sentence. The sentence in the box on the slide is a good one for this activity. Depending on the emphasis, the 7-word sentence can have 7 different meanings. Would somebody like to volunteer to read that sentence, putting the emphasis where it is in the blue on the word? And so the rest of us can hear how different it is?
I will give it a try.
Great. Who's that?
This is Anne with Doug
Thank you.
Portner.
Thank you.
I never said you hit my car. 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 I never said you hit my car.
Thank you. You did a wonderful job on that. 7 different meanings from that same sentence with the same words. Great job. There are 2 basic, oh, sorry. Oh, yes, it's me. Okay, there are 2 basic fluency rules. First, you should practice fluency after your student has already read the passage and you've checked for comprehension. At that point, your student has reviewed the vocabulary several times and is more familiar with the passage. This sets them up for success. The exception to this would be the duet reading when they're reading the text that they have never seen before. Second, don't practice other things at the same time. Don't ask comprehension questions or ask your student to stop and decode a word. Reading fluently takes all of a student's concentration. Comprehension usually improves more with fluency, but you are not working on fluency and comprehension at the same time. Comprehension is the 4th component of reading instruction. It's at the top of the tree here. Let's say we know the letters and sounds, we know the words, and we read smoothly. That doesn't necessarily mean we understood what we just read. By learning and using comprehension strategies, your student will become a better and more confident reader. The first principle of reading comprehension is that we read to understand. Depending on what the purpose is and whether the text is fiction or nonfiction or poetry, we use different strategies to help build understanding. Alphabetics, vocabulary, and fluency skills are important, but for good comprehension, a student needs to have enough background knowledge and life experience to establish a context. Without context, students will not be engaged. Teaching comprehension is important for both basic literacy and ESL students. Some ESL students may have been taught to read, pronounce, and spell English words, but they may not really understand the meaning of what they are reading. One of our basic literacy students was able to read words from the 5th grade list, but was not able to answer any comprehension questions about a story written at a second grade level. These are examples of students who need help with comprehension. When using these comprehension strategies that you saw in the pre-workshop, ask questions that will show you for sure whether your student understands or not. If you ask, do you understand this paragraph? Students will often say yes, just to please you, but you don't really know if they do. So if you ask instead, how do you think Susie felt? The student might not answer because they didn't understand what they read, or especially for an ESL student, they might not understand the question. Maybe they don't know the word felt, or might not have the vocabulary to respond. So then you need to ask in a different way. Don't just reword the question. What were her feelings? Now the student's embarrassed twice by not being able to answer. It's better to ask in a way that gives them some help and support. Like asking an either or question. Do you think Susie was happy or sad? This way you're giving the students support by helping them understand what feelings mean and also providing 2 vocabulary words that they might be searching for. Or ask a yes/no question. Do you think Susie was happy? When you don't get an answer from an open-ended question, make sure the follow-up question is more direct and is easier to answer. Let's review some key skills introduced in the workshop that support comprehension. Being able to identify the main idea and make decisions about which details are important and which are not helps comprehension. All levels of students use sequences in daily lives. They may follow a recipe or procedure at work. Teaching words like before, after, next, then will help them get events in the proper order, and that leads to better understanding. Understanding the relationship between cause and effect helps students identify main ideas in news articles, history books, and biographies, as well as fiction. This requires knowledge of words such as before, then, afterwards, because, and since, as well as understanding how these words change the overall meaning. The ability to compare, which is looking at how things are the same, and to contrast, which is looking at how things are different, usually go together. For example, when you are shopping and you want to choose between 2 products, you compare features while you contrast prices. Additionally, knowing how to tell fact from opinion is a critical skill for accurately understanding information. Finally, good readers know how to make inferences and draw conclusions as they read. Ask questions that encourage the student to think outside of the text or to read between the lines, and to draw on their past experience and knowledge as a strategy to improve comprehension skills. Directed silent reading is an activity that involves asking a question ahead of time so that your student is looking for the answer as he reads. This technique can be used at any time with any text your student is reading, and no matter what their reading level. The example here is very simple beginning reading material. When a student has trouble understanding what they're reading, it can be helpful to give very simple material below the reading level, or work on comprehension at the end of the lesson after you know they can comfortably read all the words. We'll demonstrate this strategy using the example on the slide. So I need one more volunteer to act as a student.
I will.
Okay, and Kathy, right? Okay.
Right.
This first sentence, I'm the tutor, you're the student. This first sentence tells what Anne gives to Bob. Please read it aloud.
Anne gives a bird to Bob.
Good. The next sentence tells what she gives to Cal. Please read it aloud.
She gives a cup to Cal.
Now read the next 3 sentences to yourself to find out what Anne gives to the other people. What does Anne give to Dan?
A dish.
Good. What does she give to Ed?
An egg.
Good. What does she give to Fran?
A fish.
Very good. Now that's a very simple level at a beginning lesson at a beginning level, but this same technique applies all the way up. In a real lesson, after this, I would ask my student then to read the entire paragraph aloud. If your student has trouble with silent reading, just do the whole exercise aloud. But I do like the silent to make sure that they are understanding as they read silently. I think you're muted, Karen.
You are right. I
Okay,
was-
good.
Think Aloud is a great tool for explicit instruction. In a Think Aloud, you read a short passage to your student and then tell the student what you're thinking while showing different reading comprehension strategies. These strategies might include asking questions, predicting, or finding information by making inferences. The Think Loud technique allows students to see the mental strategies that a good reader uses. Before we demonstrate this for you, let's look at the 4 steps of the Think Aloud. Step 1 is to tell the student, we're going to read a story and I will teach you about asking questions, predicting, and making inferences or reading between the lines by letting you know what I'm thinking as we read the story. Step 2 is to set the purpose for reading and to be clear about it with the student. For example, you might say, this story is fiction, meaning that it's not real. So we're just reading it for pleasure. Step 3 is to read the selection and model strategies you want to teach by stopping during reading and thinking out loud. It's important to plan for when you'll stop and what you'll say. It's okay and even preferred to show that the thinking process is not perfect. For example, you might make predictions that are wrong. And the last step is to discuss which strategies you used. If it's a longer reading selection, pick a good stopping point to review the strategies used so far. Then continue reading. Ask your student if they can think of other things they've read where that strategy would be useful. So as we demonstrate the Think Aloud technique, listen for the strategies used to teach specific skills. We're going to use a very simple story for this demonstration. So imagine that you're eavesdropping on a session with my basic literacy student who is fluent in English. I'm thinking aloud to model for my student, first, how to determine my purpose for reading. I say to the student, the title of this story, Bob is Late, tells me what happens to Bob. He's late for something. The picture shows a crowded traffic situation. That makes me think that Bob might be late for an appointment. As I read, I hope to find out why he's late. Was he late because of the traffic? After reading, well, let me read the first paragraph aloud. Bob woke up at 9 o'clock. He was late for his first job. He hoped Mr. Jones would not fire him. And then the second one is Bob got a ride with a friend named Eddie. His friend Eddie didn't have a job yet. So after reading these paragraphs, I think to myself, so Bob isn't late for an appointment. He's late for work. The story says he woke up at 9 o'clock, which probably means he wakes up earlier than this most of the time. He must have overslept. Wow, I see that Bob might get fired if he's late for work. From my own experience, I know that you can get in trouble for being late, but this seems pretty extreme. Maybe Bob just worries a lot. Then I would read the next paragraph. And he said to Bob, is Mr. Jones going to fire you? Oops, I'm sorry. After reading the paragraph, I think, so Eddie thinks that Bob might get fired too. Seems like Bob might have a good reason to be worried. Maybe something else is going on. Maybe this isn't the first time Bob has been late. I'll keep reading to learn more. I hope not, said Bob. I hate the job, but I need the money. If I had a lot of money, I would quit. After reading this paragraph, I think to myself, this story's making a little more sense now. Bob clearly doesn't like his job. He might even be hoping to get fired. I know that when someone doesn't like a job, they usually don't do as well as someone who does. Maybe the job doesn't pay maybe he doesn't do his job very well. Then I would read the next paragraph. If you get fired, let me know, said Eddie. Mike is going to the park with me at 10 o'clock. You can go along with us if you get fired. So this is interesting. It seems like Eddie doesn't take getting fired very seriously. Wonder how Bob feels about going to work instead of going to the park with his friends. He probably wishes he could go with them. After reading the last paragraph, Mr. Jones did fire Bob, so Bob rode to the park with Eddie and Mike. Then I think to myself, yep, Bob really did get fired. This is what happens when someone's late for work too many times. I still think this is an extreme reaction. Maybe it's likely there are other excuses as well. The story said that Bob doesn't like his job. Maybe he wasn't a good employee. The story isn't very clear on that. Bob knew his friends were going to the park. I'm sure he felt that would be a lot more fun than going to work. So this simple story had several opportunities to develop reading comprehension skills. For example, one inference that you could draw early on in this story is that Bob and Eddie were both quite young and inexperienced. The text would also be fairly easy to summarize since the cause and effect is very linear. For a beginning reader, this text provides a good opportunity for summarizing. And so in this Think Aloud activity, we modeled several comprehension strategies, including setting a purpose, asking questions, making predictions, summarizing, and making inferences or reading between the lines. The key purpose of this topic has been to show you ways that you can integrate all four components of reading to help your student become an independent reader. Think about what you, as a good reader, already do before, during, and after reading. Walk through these questions to guide your student and use other strategies that we've talked about that good readers use automatically to understand what they're reading. Do we have any questions? Or comments? We're at 8:34, so we're not horribly late with being done.
Okay. Well, I guess if nobody has any questions, then we're done for this evening, and we'll see you next Thursday. You'll see Karen, or it's not Thursday, Tuesday. I'm sorry.
I have a question. I put it in the chat.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Should I ask it?
Yes.
Sure, go ahead.
Go
Oh,
ahead, say it
It
out
was about
loud.
the picture dictionary. Is that a resource that's more for ESL instruction or for it is also used in basic literacy instruction?
I think because of the level of most of the vocabulary, it's used more with ESL, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be a good resource for basic. I think with basic, they use their phones more. And I'm more familiar with the basic student. But I would say, probably more likely for ESL, but that doesn't
Okay.
mean that it isn't just a good resource for anybody.
Thank you.
It depends a lot on the student. If you had a student with some sort of disabilities going on, it might be really helpful.
Okay.
So.
And
Thank you.
The way the pictures are organized, you can work on categories of vocabulary. You can work on sentence construction because there's activity going on in most of the pictures. So it's it can be used really with all well, with many students.
Thank you.
There's also more than one level. So for a basic student, you would probably use the higher level one. So that would make a difference. So.
Do you have them available at the council to buy or? Okay.
Or borrow? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Anything else for tonight? Okay, Tuesday, next Tuesday, you'll see Karen again and Sarah will be back and you'll meet Catherine Cox, I think, although I just had a text from her. She just got back from a trip and she's got COVID. So you might see me again if she can't do it. But anyway, we will be here for you and we'll talk about writing and a phone app and language experience and how to get started with your student. So.
And Carol, if I could jump in here, because I'm a coordinator as well, I deal with the trainers after they send their information in. And we have found that sometimes people delay returning their forms because they're not quite sure when they want to start or whatever is going on. If you want to start, but you want to put it off a while, turn your form in anyway. And just put a note saying, I'm turning in my form, here's my information, but I really don't want a student until December or whatever it is, okay? We don't want to lose you. So these forms at the end of the night are very important. And it's kind of discouraging for us when we don't hear back from everybody. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean that may not be for you. That's fine. Just let us know. Okay.
Question quickly. How do we know whether we gave you a form or not? I mean, I'm
Oh,
old.
everybody in the course will be getting a form.
Oh, you haven't already sent it.
No. This happens.
A lot of forms from you people.
Yes. No, at the very end, they're going to talk about the forms that you need to fill out. My comment is that, and they don't know this because it's something that's just come up, but in the last training, we had several people who waited. And then their forms finally came in, but meanwhile, we didn't know if they were coming back or not, and we couldn't match them with anybody. So just let us know, for instance, I want to teach, I'm really excited, but I'm going away for a month. That's fine. That's great. Just let us know.
You'll hear from the office about what you need to turn in after the workshop. So after the workshop, I'll send in the attendance. The office will know who completed the course. And then they'll email you with links to forms and stuff like that.
Great.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I hadn't, forgot to fill out a form already. So
no.
But I'm going to say goodbye. Yeah, you won't see me again, and that's why I wanted to say that. So thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Evening. Good night.
Bye.
Can stop recording. Or can I do that? Stop recording.